Kevin brings up some what ifs. And when you say, what if we didn't go 3-and-out the first series? So to me, that's a talent or a scheme or a play issue. That's, Rutgers could say, what if we didn't give up, 72 points today? So I don't consider that necessarily a what if, but not having Trey Sermon, Tommy Togiai, and then Wyatt Davis past halfway through the second quarter, arguably the best offensive lineman on the team. You can't make excuses for injuries. Those are part of the game. But at some point, you have to say it would have been nice to have seen what we would have had with our best offensive lineman, our best running back, and our best interior tackle, or one of two great ones.
I think what if Justin Fields comes into this game 100%? You can't sell a zone read offense if the quarterback's not going to be able to read the defensive keys and be able to go. And Justin did have some runs. I think he led the team in rushing, but it wasn't a case of where we were seeing a true zone read offense. And I see a lot of people shaking their heads with me on that one. I think that's one of the biggest things that's probably not being talked about enough. I mean, we can talk about Fields maybe not being on his passing game, but, with the whole not probably being 100%, maybe not being 75%, Ohio State once again goes into its final game of the season with a less than healthy Justin Fields, and they're not able to operate, the way that they did in all the games leading up. And I think that seriously is an issue. And as Mark said, you can't explain away or play what if, injuries or whatnot. But I mean, it's a serious thing that I'm going to look back at, and I'll probably write a piece about at some point of how things maybe could have been a little bit different if Ohio State had a more potent offense based on, 1, 2, 3, and 4 scenarios that happened, leading into or over the course of the game.
We go back to last year's Clemson game, and it's just, if one thing wouldn't have happened, if one of a dozen different things wouldn't have happened, then Ohio State wins that game. This one, it's like if all 12 of the dozen things that happened that didn't need to happen, like if Justin Fields is healthy, if Trey Sermon is healthy, if Tommy Togiai plays, if Tyreek Smith plays, if Wyatt Davis doesn't go down, if the instant replay officials aren't taking a nap, like if they don't lose Cam Brown at the start of the season, but Alabama lost players as well. What if they didn't lose Jalen Waddle, and what if he was healthy for this game? So the ifs can go many different ways. If as Kevin said, if Devontae Smith had overslept, if he had done the AM PM on the alarm, imagine what could have happened there for Ohio State. But there are things like I don't think you should ignore them. I also just think that they didn't get to Mac Jones, and maybe Tommy Togiai and Tyreek Smith would have helped that. But that dude was, I mean, he had eyes in the back of his head on that one Baron Browning blitz when he was rolling out and turned back and flipped it to a screen to Najee Harris, and Najee Harris went for some yards and made the linebackers miss. And yeah, I think all of those ifs for Ohio State make this a closer game. But it just felt like as out talented as more talented as Ohio State was against Clemson, because I feel like Ohio State very much had more talent than Clemson. I feel like Alabama's talent overshined Ohio State similarly.
So if Alabama's a 10, Ohio State's an 8, and Clemson's a 6, was it?
Right. That's how I view it.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Urban Meyer, obviously, we can always learn a lot from him. I don't know if you guys, being at the site, had a chance to watch the Big Ten show, post-game show, but you have to kind of weed through what he has to say, because it's very comes from this enormous knowledge base. But he wants to be proper in his criticism of anyone or his analysis of the game. But he was pretty forthright about safety plays, like the safeties. Just that the standard of play at the safety position is not good enough. He seemed to be pretty adamant about the talent being good enough, but he was.
Well, he recruited it. He can't throw it under the bus. He recruited
it
at
this point. Sure, wait a couple of years.
Not going to indict himself.
He certainly was very underlining his complimentary comments of the Alabama coaching. And in such a way to basically say Ohio State might have gotten out-coached.
I would agree with that. I mean, Sarkisian
doubt.
was a wizard in this one, and Alabama's defense. I don't know that they outcoached Ohio State. I just think Ohio State, once they lost Trey Sermon, they lost a big part of their plan because with Justin Fields being banged up, you don't know what one hit could have taken him out. So you're going to try to avoid that, and you lose Trey Sermon, then you lose Wyatt Davis. That's just Ohio State's personnel falling by the wayside as Alabama just does what they want, knowing that there's so much pressure on the Ohio State offense. The Alabama offense puts more pressure on the opposing offense than the Alabama defense, because I have to score almost every drive. And so a 3rd and 7 against Alabama's defense is a lot more difficult than a 3rd and 7 against anybody else, just because of what that 3rd and 7 means, not necessarily because of what Alabama is doing on 3rd and 7. It's like, if you don't convert this, you're going to give the ball back, and now Alabama scores again. Now you're down 14-0 instead of 7-0, and there's just creates more pressure. Like the pressure is heightened because of what Alabama's offense does, and that makes the defense even better.
So when Tony says that Ohio State's talent isn't up to Alabama's standards, I guess that's considered an excuse. I don't get when people put excuses. I think
that's the reason why they lost.
Yes,
Master Teague is not as good as Trey Sermon. Master Teague is not a national championship running back. The defense, as we saw, it's what kind of excuses would be like? Well, it was raining, or the sun got in their eyes. Excuses aren't. The secondary wasn't good enough. Yeah. An excuse is not the secondary wasn't good enough. That's why you lost. They didn't defend Devontae Smith. That's not an excuse. That's a reason why they lost. That's evidence.
Right. It's easy to sit there and say Alabama was the better team that night, but that doesn't explain anything. I mean, that's not making an excuse. But and I don't think I've really heard anybody sit there and say that Ohio State pissed this game away or anything like that. I mean, Ohio State got whipped. And here's the reasons they got whipped. They didn't have the secondary play. They didn't have the threat of the zone read. The play calling ended up getting to be a little bit more, conservative and safe and predictable. Nick Saban is a wizard. I mean, we got all these things there that I think that explain it.
It's like you live next to you have farmland and you live next to the river, and then your farmland gets flooded because of a bunch of rain, and you're like, man, my farmland got flooded, and somebody's like, you're just making excuses. Like, no, I mean, this is why the crops are all gone. They all flooded and they were drowned. No, come on. Excuses.
Well, I had to remind a caller this week that it's reasonable conversation, because otherwise, if we just say 52-24, then we've got like a 13-second podcast and we're done. That's why we discuss it. And if you don't like it, then you move on to whatever other entertainment venues you like. But we're going to discuss the game. So when you bring up injuries, I think there's a balance to be struck. Is it an excuse? To a certain extent, depending on if you're going to blame them, but it's a talking point that has to be addressed. Yes, there are teams and there are units on particular teams where you can lose the number one guy at that position. The number two guy comes in and he's that much less of a talent and you don't lose much. And that's to the credit of your recruiting and your depth and your talent on the roster. And there's other spots where you don't, and that's to your discredit. But it's worth mentioning that if Togiai and Sermon and Hobbiel and Wyatt Davis are there, that it's probably a little bit different of a game. Does Ohio State win? I don't think so. Alabama's a better team. But let's talk. Alabama lost one of its safeties, Jordan Battle. I don't know his replacement off the top of my head and how quality that replacement is. They probably lost next to nothing there. And that's to their credit that they've got a replacement who's just as good, most likely.
Well, Trey Sermon came into this game with the best two-game stretch in Ohio State football history in terms of running the ball. You lose him, that's significant. It's not like he came in averaging 102 yards per game in the last two games. That's anybody. He came in averaging 262 yards per game over his last two games. You take him out, yeah, that's significant. But again, he doesn't play defense, so I don't think he's the reason Ohio State lost.